Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. Well, here's a Bible trivia question to stump your friends if you'd like. Who, outside of the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel, was the only king in Israel not from the tribe of Judah? Well, common sense would tell us that it was, in fact, the very first king of Israel. You recall that David, though the greatest king of Israel, was actually not the first. There was one who came before him from the tribe of Benjamin, a man who started off on the right foot, but quickly fell into disobedience and disfavor from God. He was the first king of Israel, a very complicated fellow named Saul. Now, Saul was from a somewhat well-to-do family from the tribe of Benjamin. He had all the physical qualities of a king. He was tall in stature, popular among the people, and an apparent ideal choice to be the prince of the people of God, as the prophet Samuel described. But Saul's very ascension to the throne was actually the result of wickedness, for the people of God had, as Samuel had spoken to them, rejected God as their king. They wanted to be like the other nations of the world, so God, as he often does to unrepentant sinners, handed them over to the desires of their heart and gave them a king. Saul reigned over Israel from 1052 to 1011 BC, and his reign started out somewhat promising. He was successful over his enemies, but this success did not last long when Saul allowed his man-pleasing to take the place of obedience to God. Several times Saul disobeyed or only partially obeyed the commandments of God, and God rejected Saul as king because of it. In the middle of his reign, in fact, Saul was given a harrowing prophecy. God had wrenched the kingdom from his hand and would give it to another. Now, from this point on, God handed Saul over to his own sinful desires, and the result was disastrous for Saul, who would then be tormented by demonic forces for the rest of his life. Now, Saul's rejection of God and God's rejection of Saul resulted in quite possibly the most prosperous era in Israel's history, as God would indeed wrench the kingdom from Saul's hand and would give it to another. And that future mighty king was an obscure little shepherd boy from Bethlehem named David. Now, Saul's first interaction with David actually came when the Israelites were cornered by the Philistines and by their champion, the giant Goliath, whom no one could defeat and everyone was terrified of. Now, it was Saul's job as king to be the one to fight Goliath, but like the rest of Israel, he was simply too scared, so young David stood in Saul's and in his people's place as their champion and slayed the giant, granting his people victory. Long before he became king, David was the champion hero of Israel. Now, while David, who would actually marry one of Saul's daughters, grew in popularity, Saul grew ferociously mad in jealousy. Later in life, Saul developed this kind of love-hate relationship with David, who was in many ways a son to him, while also his greatest threat to the throne. Numerous times, Saul tried to kill David in fits of rage, but when David forgave him and spared his life on numerous occasions, Saul begged for David to show mercy on his descendants and admitted that David, better than he, would indeed someday be king of Israel. Saul's life would end in tragedy as he would die by suicide in battle after reigning over Israel for 40 years. David would replace him as king and would usher in the golden age of Israel. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.